I'm Deacon Dan, and I've been the parish deacon here at St. Paul's for nearly 6 years. And I'm very blessed and humbled to be able to moderate this session on the state of the diaconate. We've been blessed by St. Phoebe's. They've invited the following panelists to talk about what's happening with the diaconate today concerning training programs, the reactions of laity and clergy, and so forth. We'll hear from each of our distinguished panelists for 15 minutes apiece, and I will give a brief introduction to each of them now. Reverend Father Michael Courey is the priest of St. Catherine Greek Orthodox Church, Redondo Beach, California, where he has trained and worked with a full-time paid deacon for the past 12 years. Dr. James Skedros is Dean and Michael G. and Anastasia Cantonis Professor of Byzantine Studies and Early Christianity at Holy Cross Greek Orthodox School of Theology, and Director of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese Diaconate Program, which I completed. Reverend Father Anthony Gregg Roeber is Spiritual Advisor for the annual Antiochian Deacons Retreat, Professor Emeritus at Penn State University, and Visiting Professor of Church History at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. Father Anthony served as a deacon for 8 years prior to his ordination to the priesthood. And Very Reverend Father Alexander Rentel is Director of the Masters of Divinity Program, Assistant Professor of Canon Law and Byzantine Studies, and the John and Paraskevier Lecturer in Practical Theology at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary. Gentlemen, you each have 15 minutes. You'll be prompted when you have 5 minutes left and when you have 1 minute left. So, Father Kurt.
Good morning. I'm a Cleveland Indians fan. Okay? And I'd like to nominate Father John Chrysavies, the Archdeacon, to be the cleanup hitter for the Indians, because he hit a home run last night. He sure did. And with Bishop Kallistos on third base. And he drove him home. I want to thank the Phoebe Center for inviting me to speak today to a subject that's very close to my heart, very dear to my heart, a personal experience for me, and also a public experience for me. So I want to start with the personal journey of the diaconate in my life, and then how that led to a public relationship of ministry of over a decade serving in the parish setting with a full-time paid deacon. So I'll begin first in the year 1970. I know many of you weren't born in that year, before that time. My father, in blessed memory, came home one day wearing a collar. I never saw him in a collar before, and I said, Dad, you're wearing a collar. He said, well, I've been ordained a deacon. Well, I didn't go to the ordination. I was just a kid, and it was in another state. And he served as a deacon, unpaid deacon, a volunteer deacon, to a church at St. George, Antiochian in Cleveland, Ohio, with Father James Mina. And it was an experience that I'll never forget, growing up with my father being a deacon, coming home from many church services, visiting the sick especially, was a ministry dear to his heart. He had a regular job, but that really wasn't his life. His life was serving Christ. And so as a volunteer, he loved being a volunteer deacon. For him, that was a fulfillment. He was wounded in the Second World War, had to overcome a disability in order to be ordained, because you have to be fully able, right? So he had to overcome that over many years. So he was what we might call late vocation for him. But the ministry of serving the sick, the poor, the disenfranchised was very dear to his heart. And so that left an impression on me as a young man growing up, that really touched my heart. I knew him more as a deacon. 5 years later, the church called him to be a priest. But he answered that call, perhaps reluctantly. But he loved serving as a deacon. And I think that, in a sense, was my spiritual formation for seeing the diaconate as a vital ministry, a ministry of life, a ministry of touching people in their most critical and in their most vulnerable sense. And I followed him many times to hospital visits. And as I grew and matured in the faith, and the church called me to seminary, actually. Bishop Maximus of Pittsburgh sat down. I'm of Lebanese background, but married a Greek woman. And so I'm multi-jurisdictional, and was recruited into the Greek Archdiocese. And at that time, this is in the 80s now, the Greek Archdiocese was talking very much about a shortage of priests. I don't know if any of you remember that. We have a shortage of priests. Well, I'm short, so maybe I'll be able to fulfill that role. So I went to Holy Cross and was ordained. I was a deacon for a day. Deacon for a day, because they needed priests, you see. So I served 6 years in a big parish in Portland, Oregon. No deacons, but I learned team ministry as an assistant priest. And then had the 5 years in Alaska. I saw Father Dunham and Father Mark there. No deacons in the Greek Church there, but when the Russians came to visit for the 200th anniversary of Orthodoxy in Alaska, boy, did they bring deacons. And I think that the deacons were really, they were full-time ministerial deacons, at least at that point, and following the patriarch around, and because these were older men serving as permanent deacons, and that really touched me. Finally, I was assigned to a large, what I consider a large parish. It perhaps depends on your jurisdiction, but where I've been for 20 years, and I was overwhelmed when I was first assigned there. I had a full-time, we called them a secretary back then, and a part-time janitor. I guess that's not the word we should use today, but that's what we called them in those days. And I was overwhelmed. The ministry was just constant. I'm trying to raise children and pay attention to the garden of my family, which was being neglected. The weeds were growing. And I was at a conference. This was in about 2002. So I was there from 97 to 2002. In Metropolitan Anthony of Blessed Memory, all the clergy were gathered, just the clergy. And he said, we have a window, an opportunity. The patriarch is going to allow us to train and ordain, quote unquote, permanent deacon. But there's no such thing as the permanent diaconate. However, if you have a pious male, in your community, and he has at least a bachelor's degree and wants to serve the church as a volunteer, let me know and recruit him. So I thought about this. I said, this is an opportunity. So there was a man who came to me when I first came to the parish and said, I'd love to serve. I can't go to seminary because of my circumstances, but I'd love to serve the church. If there's ever an opportunity, please let me know. So right away I picked up the phone. And I needed at the very least, a part-time youth minister. I asked him if he'd be interested in that. He said, yes. I said, we'll pay you. We'll be part-time, work on the weekends. He had a full-time job. He wasn't now even knowing about that I was going to call him to be a deacon. He just wanted to serve the church. So he came in as a youth minister for a couple of years. And then my secretary left. So I needed an administrator. Now it's administrative assistant. We've changed the jargon. So I said, would you like to be my administrative assistant, and I'll train you? Well, he was a restaurateur, manager in a restaurant. But he loved the church. He wanted to serve the church. He certainly knew about serving as a manager in a restaurant, right? It's very, very New Testament, right? Serving tables. This is the candidate. This is the one. So he came in, left his career, came in full-time. His name is Kyriakos, and he was actually a member of this parish for years and served with the founding pastor here. That's where his love for serving came. And so in time, I said to him, I'd really like you to consider the diaconate. Oh, no. not me. I said, no, you. Definitely you. And I know you have it within you. And so after a little persuasion, he took a class. At that time, they didn't have them at Holy Cross, but we had classes at the ranch, St. Nicholas Retreat Center, and he was ordained in the year 2004, and we've been serving together ever since. And his role has changed now from part-time youth minister to full-time parish administrator, now to pastoral assistant. And all the training was done on campus with me. And it's developed into a team ministry, a beautiful ministry in which I've been able to expand my gifts, charismas, if you will. I have a special love for a young adult ministry and for education. I was able to expand that and to continue my education, knowing that I had a full-time minister in the parish, so who could answer a call, a first call, in the case of a hospital visit, or a death, or to bring comfort to a family coming in crisis to the church, even if he didn't have a seminary education. So we work and have worked together and have expanded the ministry in many different ways. The most important thing is, to me, and we shouldn't overlook this, is the fullness of the divine liturgy. Now oftentimes when we speak with our bishops, they say, well, don't tell me you need a deacon just to help you at the liturgy and give communion. That's not enough. And that isn't enough. But let's not also diminish that role. That's an important role. And in my ministry as a priest, I really feel incomplete without a deacon. You look at the liturgical books over time, and sometimes they just replace the deacon's part with priest. But if you really look at the essential liturgy, it's without a deacon, it's not complete. There's really something missing. And I think that spreads out into the community, as the deacon is that bridge, if you will, between the laity and the clergy. That bridge extends into the daily ministry, and with our parish of about 500 families, that daily ministry is 7/24. It's never ending. We both are swimming in a pool of human need and barely treading water. About a year ago, Father Nicholas Denishenko, Dr. Denishenko was here, we were speaking, was at LMU and had an opportunity to serve with us. And the one liturgy, many liturgies I'll remember, but serving with two deacons simultaneously, especially when a bishop comes for a hierarchical service, I didn't know if I was in heaven or on earth. There's something very, someone was asking, well, what is the meaning of ordination? Well, let's not forget that ordination is a mystery. There's a mystery. There's something we can't intellectually comprehend, but in the midst of that liturgy, I really didn't know if I was in heaven or earth, surrounded by these two angels. The deacons act as angels, if they will. And so the fullness of the experience of the church, both liturgically and ministerially, outside of the liturgy, serving the people, meeting their needs, is fulfilled in the diaconate. In my experience, and every parish, I don't care how large or small, depending on you can have a part-time deacon paid, full-time deacon paid, especially in a larger parish. It's a must. It must be. We have to move into this new era. There is a shortage of deacons today in the church, and that needs to be fulfilled. And I'm going to conclude with this. And I want to conclude with an experience of spirituality. I have to say that spirituality was probably the last thing that I considered in seminary. Oh, I love church history, and I love the music, and I love the theology, and the pastoral care. But spirituality was spirituality. But my wife was very much into spirituality. That was her life, was spirituality. And it was something that I didn't really think you could learn. You have to experience. And I experienced Orthodox spirituality not through the male ministry. The male ministry for me was more authoritarian, didactic, if you will, pastoral, certainly, But in terms of spirituality, the most incredible experience I've ever had was serving in the altar as the only male in the convent. Here I have to serve liturgy, right? So I need help. So who's in the altar with me? In the altar with me, right? The nuns. But one nun in particular, whose name I won't mention. And as I'm celebrating the liturgy, and this nun is assisting me like a deacon, essentially as a deacon, in the altar, all of the sort of arguments vanished. There's no theological barrier at all. First, to a woman being in the altar. Second, to a woman being a deacon. Because what I experienced with her was the presence of the Holy Spirit. And I don't know if you've ever experienced or have seen Penthos in its state of truly an outpouring of the gift of tears. As I'm reciting the 50th Psalm, she hands me the censer, the tears are pouring down like streams of rivers. And I said to myself, this woman is a deaconess. And she has been my spiritual teacher. So, my beloved, in summary, the diaconate, the state of the diaconate today, I believe, is being restored and renewed. Certainly in my parish. When we first started out with the deacon, people would come up to me. I've been Orthodox all my life, and I have never seen a deacon in the church. Now that accent was a Russian, Lebanese, Greek accent. And I said, well, now you have. Welcome to Orthodoxy. This is the fullness of the faith. And then people didn't know, well, can the deacon give communion? Should I go to the deacon? It's like, is his chalice less than the priest's chalice? You see, we had to overcome all of these things. But over time, the team ministry has developed in the sense that it's like Bishop Callistos Ware and his student, our beloved deacon, John, who gave such a beautiful opening yesterday. They're a team ministry, really, of intellectuals. Mine is an experience of service in a community without a deacon. Serving in a parish, doesn't matter full-time, part-time, male or female, without an ordained deacon in the church, who are walking on one leg. And I'm a full supporter of the restoration of the male and female diaconate. Thank you.
Thank you. We have some slides we'd like to show you. So my name is Jim Skedros, and I'm Dean at Holy Cross Orthodox School of Theology in Brookline, and I've been running the Diaconate program at Holy Cross. That is sort of co-directed by the Eparchial Synod of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and our faculty at Holy Cross. Deacon Sal Fazio, who has put together this PowerPoint, is here with us, and Deacon Dan Cunningham, both are graduates of our program. So what I'd like to do here is give you just some information and kind of some background on the program, how it got started, maybe some thoughts on about what the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese is thinking about the diaconate program, and then to share with you some statistics that we put together for today and that we've kind of gathered as well over the years to kind of track how the diaconate program has been growing, its challenges, its struggles, and whatnot. As we've heard, in the GOA, Father Michael noted here that the diaconate in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, I can't speak, but our other two speakers might be able to enlighten us a little better. I would say the diaconate in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese in America is probably the one jurisdiction where it's been the least visible, right? it's probably anecdotally you've all heard, people say, I've never seen a deacon before. At least people that have gone to Greek Orthodox parishes. I never saw a deacon growing up myself. And even our local bishop, I grew up in Salt Lake City, when he would visit, he didn't have a deacon of his own. So I don't think I saw a deacon until probably I got back to seminary. And I don't think that's unusual. That's not unusual. But as Father Michael said, around the year 2002, Metropolitan Anthony had started something here in the metropolis of San Francisco. I think Dan was initially a part of it as well. But around 2004, 2005, our faculty at Holy Cross got a call from the Archdiocese and said, look, we'd like you to put together a diaconate training program for the Archdiocese. So the faculty got together, put together a program, and we finally launched it in the summer of 2007. We had 3 students. Deacon Sal was one of them. And we had one deacon who was a deacon in the GOA in Florida and had been a deacon for several years, but heard about the program and decided to come up for the summer as well. He had had no formal theological training either. And we began in 2007 with 3+1 students at Holy Cross. We weren't quite sure what we were doing, and I don't think they were quite sure what they were doing. It was a program in process. But Sal, if you'll turn to the next slide here. Sal's done a little research for us, so we're going to put Father Rentel on the spot here. Could you give us the date of the Regional Synod of Neo Caesarea?
The date is actually heavily questionable.
Well said, as a good academic. But there is Canon 15 that does seem to hint, based on the 7 deacons in Scripture and the 7 deacons in Rome, which we know there were 7 deacons in Rome, each for the 7 hills or the 7 geographical areas of Rome, that each city should have 7 deacons. So we like to throw that up on the screen as we're trying to, or anytime we get a chance to talk about the diaconate. We're going to skip the pop quiz. We'll go to the next. Sal had some fun with this, but yeah. All right. So we start the program in 2007. It's interesting. We did start out as a permanent diaconate program. We had these wonderful brochures. We had them published. They go to the Archdiocese. Somehow we get a call back from the Archdiocese, which says, Patriarch Bartholomew has told us we can't use the word permanent. We don't have a permanent diaconate in the Orthodox Church. And I guess in some sense we don't, but that almost is part of the problem. We were talking about last night, it seemed the diaconate as a stepping stone for something else. So we changed the title to special, but then that sounded not very good. So then we changed it to diaconate program. So we call it the diaconate program. Our selling point to anybody that's interested is that this is permanent. This isn't a stepping stone to the priesthood. If you want to be, if you're interested or you're called to the priesthood, we have MDiv programs for that. St. Vladimir's has MDiv programs for that. And in fact, all of our students that enroll in the program sign a piece of paper that basically says that they will not pursue the priesthood without conversation with the Metropolitan, and that they will attempt or consider or try to earn the Master of Divinity program. Because our bread and butter at Holy Cross is the Master of Divinity program, and if we do a round of an end run around the MDiv program through the diaconate program, that hurts us. So we think a lot about that. In fact, we do ask ourselves the question, which is an interesting question to ask, of the 95 or so students, and we'll get to that in a minute, but of the 95 or so students that have signed up for the program, what percentage of those might have come to the seminary and gone to the MDiv program and served as clergy? We'll never know the answer to that, but that's not a major challenge for us. But let me just give you an overview of how the program works. It's a 3-year program. It's a combination of hybrid residential study, distance learning, and mentoring. So the residential part happens during the summer. We started out with 2 weeks of intensive summer coursework and pastoral training and liturgical training. We've cut down to now about 9 days, 2 weekends, and a week It just seems to be a little better for the candidates. It's harder for them to get 2 weeks off in the summer. Most of them tend to use their only 2 weeks off for their whole year work to the program. And so there, during that time, they are taught classes by our own faculty, and then they also work on their music, work on the liturgics, and some pastoral care. What I found that probably most remarkable about those summer programs, and I think Deacon Dan and Deacon Sal could attest, is that the residential piece is really important because it creates a form of community. And these gentlemen that come to the program have really kept in touch. They do it on their own. I don't manage it. I manage only the actual programmatic elements of it. But once they're done, once they get their completion letter or certificate, I don't really keep in touch with them, except we have done a couple of surveys. But they keep in touch among themselves, and they've done a really, really good job of that. And in fact, what we have done over the years in the summer is we try to invite back graduates of the program to come back and do some of the liturgical teaching, some of the chanting, and to be with us to share their personal experiences with the students. So we have that academic piece on our campus, the residential piece. I would say, though, probably as Father Michael hinted, one of the key success elements of the program is the mentoring that takes place. Sal, do you want to get a slide here? We'll move on to the next. Yeah, okay, we'll come back. Let's go to the previous one. Yeah, okay. All right, is the mentoring. So each student has a clergy mentor. Assigned by their local metropolitan, it's usually the local priest, but it's not always the local priest. In the New York area, it's one priest in particular to whom various diaconate candidates will travel to his parish once a month, maybe even more often, and get training. But it's usually the local priest who does the mentoring. And there's a lot of education that goes on there. Spiritual direction, they're required to meet once a month, keep a journal of their conversation with their mentor. The mentor has to fill out a completion form each year on the kind of spiritual guidance they're doing, but also on the liturgical, pastoral visitations, and other aspects of the ministry that they're being trained. So the program really wouldn't work if we didn't have dedicated local parish priests who are willing to spend the time and educate somebody into the diaconate, into the role of the diaconate. We also have what we call cluster groups. These are metropolis groups that we have created for the metropolitans. Each metropolitan in the Greek Archdiocese oftentimes has a little different liturgical practices that they want to institute. And so what they do is they gather the groups together, and at least once a year, although they haven't been running as much as we have liked them to run. And then alumni outreach, which I mentioned. Let's go on to some of the demographics now, some of the statistics. So over the years, we've enrolled 95 students, okay, and you can see our peak years were in 8, 9, 10, and maybe into 11. And that's kind of where we had the largest cohort. Our 10th cohort started in 2017. One year in 2015, we didn't have any people enrolled in the program, but that was because our archdiocese, the synod, sent out a message that they were putting the program on hold, and they reneged on their message. And so for that year, I was gearing up for gearing down to close the program and to make sure that all those people that gotten through were going to wrap up. And then we were told, no, the program isn't closed. And so we geared up again, and in 16 we got 8, in 17 we have 5, and we're on track to probably get another 5 to 8 or 7 or 8 that will show up in the summer of 2018. 56 students have completed the program, and of those 56, 35 have been ordained. So I would say one of my surprises when I was asked to take over this as a member of our faculty and kind of shepherd it, I was not anticipating that the Archdiocese would actually pull through and ordain. I don't know why, and I don't know why I say that. I just didn't have the faith. And to my surprise, they've ordained 35 men. I do want to point out, of those 95, they're all men, but our material, our publication, our PR material never uses the word man or male. We purposely have kept it non-gender specific. We've had only 2 women actually call us over the years, can I come? And our answer is always, yes, you can come, but you need the recommendation of your metropolitan. It's kind of cheesy on my part to push it off, but it is true. You can't enter the program without your blessing from the metropolitan. So, but we have purposely kept it gender neutral for perhaps the possibility that women will be coming and studying with us. Of those 35, 3 have been ordained to the priesthood. Now, that's a number we don't like, but let me give context for that. One of those actually came back to Holy Cross and St. Vlad's, did a year at St. Vlad's, came to Holy Cross and did a year, and did an MDiv. Came back and got his MDiv and became a priest. 2 of those, the local metropolitan needed a priest, and he ordained them straight to the priesthood. Not pleased with that, but that did happen. Average age 49, and interesting, about 4 out of 10 of our students are converts, are not cradle Orthodox. And next, just another statistic. Oh, there's one more statistic that isn't on there. About 100%, help me gentlemen, of our deacons are married. Is that true? I think about 100% of the candidates that are coming into the program are married. Okay, we did a quick, I know I'm out of time, but we did a quick survey we sent out 32 surveys this April, May, to priests that have fit deacons in their parish from our program. 28 responded. Their response was, what activities does your deacon currently participate in? We gave them 5 choices. Liturgical service, 100%. Pastoral visitation, somewhere in the 80s. Adult ministry, youth ministry, somewhere in the 40s. Community chaplain, that is, are they doing something outside of the chaplaincy? Very few. Okay, next. Interesting question. What tangible benefits has the deacon served at your parish provided? Interestingly, what I find very interesting is the one that Father Michael said right here. 80% or more said parishioners have the opportunity to witness the fullness of the liturgy as a deacon and myself worship together in our assigned roles as clergy indicated in the pew worship books. In other words, the priest is recognizing the fullness. Whereas when this program got started, I remember speaking with GOA priests who were telling me, what do I need a deacon for? They say all the parts in the liturgy anyway. What will I do? Okay. Right, they can delegate liturgical services. This is interesting. Deacon provides me with more time to devote to my energies to other aspects of parish life. They're part-time. These guys are part-time. They show up usually on Sundays. Some do a little bit more, but really they're part-time. So unlike a full-time deacon, that percentage, if they were full-time deacons, might change. Next. What areas would you like to see our program focus on to better prepare deacons? Liturgics and chant. Theology, Greek language, yeah, I know. Forget right? I know, which is kind of sad in pastoral ministry. But it seems that what they really want is they want them better trained in the liturgics and in their Greek language. One more. Would you send somebody to the program again? And an overwhelming 90% said yes. So I think that's an impressive figure as well. I think that's it, Sal. Oh, and within a larger context, in the GOA, our 35 deacons from the program that have graduated and have been ordained. The GOA has about 70 to 80, 80 to 90. We haven't been able to figure it out. Father John, maybe you know. But somewhere in the 80s of deacons, ordained deacons serving the GOA. And we couldn't quite come up with any better statistics. And future of the program, I'll let you read that. My takeaway, 2 takeaways, and then I've got to go. I'm very surprised that the Diaconate program has been as successful as it has been. But it's as successful as it has been, as I told Marilyn many years ago, is it opened a opportunity for service to the church for people to get involved. That was recognized by the church. People always want to serve. But something that's recognized by the church and blessed by the church. The door was open and people came flocking to this way. Thank you very much.
That's right. Here? Am I recording properly? Okay.
Well, I'm very pleased to be here and appreciate the invitation. Let me very quickly just say something about my personal background before we get to the business at hand. I was indeed a deacon for 8 years in the Antiochian Archdiocese, and as Father John rightly said, I wasn't called to the priesthood, I was ordered into it by my bishop. A little bit about my background. I was raised Roman Catholic, studied for the Roman Catholic priesthood. My spiritual formation was essentially pre-Vatican II through the council and in a seminary that was very monastically organized. So I had a very sort of monastic training as a Catholic seminarian. After I decided I could not in conscience serve in the Roman Church, I struggled for a number of years as a Lutheran. That's my father's paternal background all the way back to the Reformation itself. And then finally, we found our home in the Antiochian Archdiocese. I served as a layman for a number of years before being asked then by the priest who brought us into the church to consider serving as a deacon, and that meant the St. Stephen's program. So let me start by saying something about the state of the diaconate in the Antiochian Archdiocese. Let me say, first of all, that I tried a number of years ago, and this is now out-of-date material, to survey exactly where the diaconate is in the Antiochian Archdiocese with regard to the OCA and the Greek Archdiocese. And it was tough to come up with any kind of statistics. It was amazingly difficult, actually. But let's say 3 to 5 years ago, what I thought I understood was basically, in terms of numbers of deacons, the OCA and the Antiochians are, in a sense, at the head of the pack, and the Archdiocese, I think, was the least represented. There were at that time, so 5, 6 years ago, certainly less than half as many deacons as there are priests in the Antiochian and OCA parishes, but nonetheless, they're pretty well represented, as we have actually considerably more deacons than in the Greek Archdiocese. The number, I would say, probably has fallen, and the reason it has fallen is due to what we already heard about this morning. There is, contrary to what we were hearing 5 years ago, we have a surplus of seminarians, we don't know what we're going to do with them. Now we're in crisis. We don't have enough priests, and within my own personal knowledge of the deacons that I work with in my own diocese, at least 4 of them are being ordained to the priesthood. Just boom, 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 boom. So we're losing deacons, we're hemorrhaging in a way that I wish we weren't. But it's precisely because of this rather surprising turnaround where we need parish priests as well. Let me say that this is a very centralized process of becoming a deacon in the Antiochian Archdiocese. You must, in fact, have the recommendation of your parish priest to even be considered, but everything is done through a centralized board of ordination under the metropolitan. That is, the individual dioceses do not make the decision about whether, in fact, to ordain. They're consulted, of course, but this is a central process that is handled by the metropolitan and the board that he appoints. So let me say something about the training. As many of you probably know, the St. Stephen's program is more or less the track by which people in the Antiochian Archdiocese become deacons. So let me say a little bit about the background of that as well. The long and the short story is we may not be at the point of saying that we have good news, but we certainly have better news than we did, say, a generation or 2 ago. If you talk to priests in the Archdiocese who were of Metropolitan Philip's generation and so forth, it's very clear that to the extent that deacons existed, in those days they were there for one purpose, and that was to shorten the communion line, period. I'm quite serious. I mean, there was absolutely nothing else that was going on. There was no training, there was no real thought given to formation or anything of that sort. If you were reasonably good, if you were reasonably moral, and you also knew your way around and had a halfway decent voice, that was it. Not unlike what Proto-Presbyter Thomas Hopko of blessed memory said once upon a time, his memories of also what happened in the OCA many, many years ago, that all were called and a few were chosen. Or was it the other way around? I think everybody was called. Let me say that I think what's happened, of course, is that because of Metropolitan Philip's own experience, he came to this country as a deacon in the 1950s, and because of his own concern of the need for a diaconal ministry, he actually encouraged then the people who worked closely with him to think about how we could acquire people for service who could not, because of financial issues, because of delayed vocations, could not all basically be sent to seminary. And the St. Stephen's program really began as a way of dealing with delayed vocations or with converts who had perhaps been to a Protestant or Catholic seminary but needed a foundation in Orthodox theology and praxis. And that's really why the St. Stephen's program began. It is a 3-year program, as you probably know, of correspondence in a number of areas, liturgics, doctrine, canon law, history, and so forth, plus a mandatory residence at the Antiochian village every year in the 3-year program. Attendance, acceptance into the program does not guarantee ordination, but in fact that is the baseline. And the assumption is that anyone who in fact is going to be accepted into the program has an earned baccalaureate degree from an accredited institution. So I mean there is a kind of expectation of background that is in place. The program has been remarkably successful. In fact, numbers in the hundreds of applicants every year, and now from all over the world. We have people who are graduates of this program in Ireland, in Africa, in all kinds of places all over the world. So in that sense, it's probably been a great success. I would say that there is a strong preference for future deacons to go on and to perhaps complete a master's degree in applied theology under the University of Ballemond. And after many, many years of discussion, I think we may actually be at the point where the program is going to be accredited by the theological authorities in the United States. It has not been an accredited program up to this point, and there have been all kinds of international reasons why that has been delayed, but I think it's actually happening. It's also important to realize that the St. Stephen's program now actually has different tracks. In other words, you can actually apply to this program with the distinct intention of being trained in youth ministry, catechetics, liturgical music. Not necessarily, therefore, everybody is thinking of being prepared for the diaconate, and men and women both enroll in the program. So you have to understand, therefore, that this has become a kind of multi-ministerial way of educating people through this combination of distance plus residential study at the House of Studies. So if we talk about the training, therefore, I would say certainly it has improved. One of the areas that perhaps needs continued attention is, in fact, the whole question of training in liturgics. That has been sort of up and down depending on who has been in charge of that dimension of the program. And there's also an interesting question about what do you do with people who actually get through the program and who actually then are certified and are ordained to the diaconate. What do you do about sort of post-diaconal training? What do you do about refresher courses? What do you do about spiritual guidance after they begin their career in ministry? And that actually is what got me rather interested in this issue during my own time as a deacon. Because one of the things that I experienced, and this is true of all of us who are deacons, is that after you were sort of off in the parish, you were pretty much on your own. There is, of course, a continued sort of way in which we've come to think, given the fact that we have become effectively a kind of presbyter-centered church, I think, in this country. And let me say, my assumption here is that talking about the diaconate cannot be actually done without talking about the state of the episcopacy and the presbyterate, because they are, in fact, intimately connected to one another. And because of the fact that if you are off in a parish as a deacon, often enough, since you are more or less on your own, we still have the rather interesting phenomenon that if you look at things that are sent out, Father John mentioned this last night, you get invitations to the so-called clergy symposium. But if you attend the clergy symposium or the clergy retreat in the Antiochian Archdiocese, you very quickly discover what it is. It's a priest retreat. There's actually nothing that's done that would address the issues of diaconal ministry. And it was partly because of that issue that I became myself interested in the question of what could we do about actually providing for training beyond that point. And so, with the blessing of my Bishop Thomas Joseph in our diocese, I actually was authorized to begin a series of yearly retreats. And so every year for the last 8 years, we have actually gathered the deacons together. We've either met in a specific parish or we've met at his cathedral. We've tried to do different venues, and we've had a retreat, and in almost every case, I've been blessed to actually find an archdeacon, a protodeacon, someone of many years' experience to be the retreat master, with the very specific question of saying, what is diaconal ministry? What is it that you do? What are the problems that you encounter? What are the opportunities what are the frustrations that you have in working with either priests or bishops or laity? Simply because of the fact that opportunity, I think, doesn't really exist, certainly not across all the jurisdictions, and not certainly even in our own archdiocese. So that basically is part of why I thought it was important to encourage the deacons to get together, to share their perspectives on what they actually do, and to be able to talk with one another about saying, what is our diaconal ministry? How are we seen? How do we interact with one another? What's our relationship with the bishop and with the priest with whom we serve? And so that's in fact what I'm about to do in another 2 weeks. I'll actually be in Charleston, West Virginia with all the deacons of our diocese. We also have made this invitational to people across jurisdictions. So we've had people from the OCA, from the Greek Archdiocese, from the Ukrainian. All kinds of people have shown up. Partly, I think, because it's as far as I know, it may be a unique opportunity. I'm not aware that this is being done, may be done, but if so, I've not been able to discover it. So that deacons can actually get together, talk with one another, and simply express what they're doing, not just liturgically, but in prison ministry, in working with the poor, in visitation, in carrying the sacrament to the sick, a whole range of things that, in fact, deacons are expected to do. So the third issue that we were supposed to talk about this morning was reception. How has this sort of gone down, you might say, among the parishes, among the clergy, and so forth? My basic sense is that the reception has been positive. In the Antiochian parishes where we've gone, with the retreats, or in parishes where I've actually been talked to the deacons, there's been no antagonism. There's been some surprise because, of course, as you well know, often enough for most people of the older generation, the deacon was just as unknown as the bishop. They have no idea that these creatures existed, but they were curiosities, perhaps. But only recently, I think, have they actually begun to say, now we understand that this is not a one-man show, that in fact the liturgical expression of the church is in fact a communal one, etc., etc. So I don't think there's ever been any real sort of antagonism, curiosity perhaps. But the fact is that many parishes still do not have deacons, and therefore don't have the opportunity to experience liturgy with the deacon serving with the priest. I think there is at least a partial problem that persists in some quarters. There are, in fact, I think on the one hand, there's evidence that the priests actually do appreciate deacons, but some priests do still have the tendency, if I can put it bluntly, to horn in on the deacon and to sort of take over the proclamation of the gospel and to do things that they just frankly shouldn't be doing. And here it seems to me the hierarchy needs to pull up its socks and have a word with the presbyters and say, fathers, behave yourselves. You have plenty to do on your own. You don't need to take over what Father Deacon is supposed to be doing. So I would say that the bishops are supportive. I've never encountered a bishop yet in my own jurisdiction or others where they've been opposed to having the deacons do what they're supposed to do. But I have to say that they haven't also been very proactive. The diaconate just is not out there on their agenda. If you look at what comes out of the statements from the Assembly of Bishops, or for that matter in a jurisdiction, we talk always about the importance of recruiting people to the priesthood. No doubt we do need that. But we do not seem actually to be as dedicated to the idea of recruiting people to the diaconate. And I think this is something that I wish that bishops would actually make one of their priorities. Some years ago, I gave a talk at the Orthodox Theological Society of America about this issue, and was delighted that actually there were a couple of bishops in presence, which is a rarity. They often don't bother to show up for our meetings. But a couple of them did. And I was at least gratified when I said that I thought that the diaconate had suffered neglect and that the bishops needed to make this a priority because the health of the episcopate, I do think, does in part depend upon the health of the diaconate. I'm really quite convinced of that. And I was happily surprised to have the bishops rise and say, Father Deacon, unfortunately you are right. We have dropped the ball on this. Confession is good for the soul, but actually repentance and action would be better. And so far, I can't say that I've seen the hierarchs actually making this an agenda issue. So I wish that they would. I think that on the whole, therefore, the response that I see at the parish level has been positive. They do, in fact, have no difficulty in seeing the deacon not only serve liturgically, but to make house visitations, to come visit the sick, to bring the Eucharist to those who are housebound or who are in hospital and so forth. I've never encountered Antiochians who have a problem with that. So, in the sense, I think that's all to our advantage. And therefore, if in fact we can continue to develop the training through the Antiochian Archdiocese House of Studies, I think we in fact have a pretty good chance of continuing to recruit and hopefully to place these people. I think there's very little question that Metropolitan Joseph has in a certain sense, an increasingly higher standard of expectation about who he chooses to ordain. He's looking very, very closely at people's academic, their intellectual background, their liturgical abilities, as well as their situation in terms of their families. So he has high expectations, which I think is appropriate. If you all know Dr. Louis Batsavos' very good book on office in the early church, you know that the standards that were expected of a deacon are almost identical with those that are expected of the bishop. There's no difference. And I think that that's probably what it should be. So that, I think, is kind of sort of where we're headed. As I say, we may not have entirely good news, but it's a lot better news than it was a generation ago. So, thank you.
I'm Father Alexander Rentel, and not only, as was announced, I'm a professor at St. Vladimir Seminary, I also teach up at Holy Cross, where I teach canon law there. I've succeeded Professor Batsavos at least for a couple of years. I also want to make a plug for Holy Cross. You know, the diaconal program that Dr. Skedros was talking about, he's actually been involved with the group that accredits seminaries across the board in the United States, the ATS, the Association of Theological Schools, who are revising their accreditation standards. Dr. Skedros has been involved exactly in their diaconal vocations standards, because these are things that schools do. And so the experience at Holy Cross is actually going to go into, the actual new standards that are coming in the next couple of years. I forget who was involved in another aspect of that. So I commend him. I was teaching at St. Vladimir's for 16 years. I was a proud deacon, a very happy deacon for 4.5 years. And just my own confession, one of my happiest moments of being a deacon, for those in the Church of Columbus, there are many. I was chanting, I think, at one of the Paschal services, and there was a young family in the annex, the building that was not attached to the church, and the baby was asleep and heard my voice and woke up crying. So from the altar to the annex, I got that kid awake. Anyway, one of the proudest moments of my diaconal life. I loved service as a deacon. When I became a priest, I was somewhat melancholy. Maybe that's just my Slavic background, I don't know. Anyway, I would like to thank the members of the St. Phoebe Center for the Diaconess, especially its president, Anne-Marie Masera, whom I've known many, many years, for the opportunity to address this meeting on the state of the diaconate within the Orthodox Church in America. Thank you. And in my remarks, I kind of base what I have to say on two different sources, one my own and one I had to reach out and get some assistance from. But anyway, my own. It's a capacity, in my capacity as the Master of Divinity Program Director at St. Vladimir Seminary, not just for being a professor there, but being in charge of the program there. But then I also reached out to Mr. Barry Bigyanko, who is the Executive Administrator of the OCA Chancery. He's kind of the Executive Assistant for the Metropolitan Deacon. He's the guy who crunches numbers, gets the paperwork, makes sure his trains run on time in the OCA. And believe it or not, they do often. Anyway, so I pulled from him the hard data, how many deacons, what they did, and all these sorts of things. He was very generous, and I would like to publicly thank him. He did this completely on his own time, and he actually thanked me later for forcing him to go into the database, because he said, I found a lot of mistakes, and I had to clean them up. If you know Barry, you know that that's genuine when he says thank you. Anyway, so in my role as the Master of Divinity Program Director, I oversee in general the program for our MDiv students, people come in for a 3-year degree, and also those whom we term special students, which refers to the seminarians that we put in our MA program, our Master of Arts program, that have received MDiv degrees from other institutions, non-Orthodox institutions. They've converted then, and they're seeking to be ordained, and they come in, we call them special students. So they're taking classes, participating in some of the programs that we have to complement their Master of Divinity degree from their previous education. So in this capacity, I want to address the formation program of seminarians. I'm very heartened to hear Dean Skedros and Father Anthony, my colleague now at St. Vladimir Seminary, talk about these vocational programs. But I want to speak about especially seminary education. I'm very passionate about that. So again, as I say, in this capacity, I want to address the formation program of seminarians. a program that stands as a basic requirement for ordination in near all jurisdictions, and talk about that as an entree into the state of the diaconate in the OCA. But in general contour, the Master of Divinity program at St. Vladimir's is similar to the program at Holy Cross, but also to the other OCA seminary, our sister school, St. Tikhon's in South Canyon, Pennsylvania. There are some differences, admittedly, and I teach at both schools, and I can see up close, as I say, I can see up close and personal some of the differences, hearing from the students, but also seeing these things. But I think in general we can assume enough general commonalities between the three schools. I leave out, for example, St. Herman Seminary in Alaska, which has a very unique vocation to train the native clergy up there. The program is a little bit different. And I think for the three schools offering the Master of Divinity program, in the main, the programs are very similar. The OCA, of course, though, I want to mention, has a very well-regarded and well-run diaconal vocations program by my good friend, Father Kirill Sokolov, who runs this program, which is, though, not a degree program of any type, but an in-house program for lay vocations. I note that men who come through this program and those who come up through similar diocesan programs are considered exceptions to the normal Master of Divinity formation, and do require the recommendation of the Board of Theological Education, a synodal board, and a blessing by the Holy Synod prior to ordination for their ordination. Within Master of Divinity, a candidate in one of the dioceses can just be ordained, not just be, but be ordained without further reference to the Synod in the OCA. But without a Master of Divinity program, the Synod and the Board of Theological Education gets involved. So, our Master of Divinity formation. In sum, the Master of Divinity program is a professional degree, and we like to think of it at St. Vladimir's as being closely akin to an MSW, Master of Social Work, and intends to provide seminarians with a mix of academic and practical training, formally and informally presented. Concretely, what this means is that seminarians receive a broadly conceived formation of, number one, typical academic classes, and we, especially at St. Vladimir Seminary, and I know the same is true at Holy Cross, take academics very, very seriously. Consider it part of our proud heritage. So, as I say, we have these typical academic classes of church history. We have our church history professor here, Father Anthony Roeber. Biblical studies, patristics, liturgical theology, patristics and liturgical theology practically being synonymous with St. Vladimir Seminary from Father John Mayen or Father Alexander Schmemann, and canon law. One of the great disciplines of the church. So we have typical academic classes, and I don't think I need to elaborate more on that. Practical classes we offer, music, homiletics, liturgics, another field that I teach in, how to serve. And I would point out that this is, for that Master of Divinity program, the time spent in classes, we expect a minimum of 90 credit hours over a 3-year period. Very intense. And if students are just doing that, it'd be a very intense program, but there's much more. As I was saying. So number one, we have these academic classes. Number two, practical classes of music, homiletics, liturgics, as I say. And then their field education. The seminary adopted a number of years ago prison ministry. The seminarians experience in their first year, their first or second semester. And then hospital ministry, a clinical pastoral education, which requires 400 hours in a clinical setting. And then also parish assignments. And parish assignments run between 1 to 3 years. Number four, the Master of Divinity program is made up of chapel life. And that is a very formal, I oversee that, so I can tell you, it's a very formal program. It's about 10 to 12 hours a week outside of Lent in chapel, and about 14 to 15 inside Great Lent. Where seminarians attend chapel, above all, participate, sing, read, and serve in the seminary chapel. And then the last part, the last component of seminary life is, of course, community life, which is a mix of very formal and informal, has these diverse components. I often say to students when I interview them, one of the best things about coming to St. Vladimir's is community life. One of the worst things about seminary life is community life. But you have to be there to understand that. But anyway, now, far from being a plug or a commercial for seminaries, and I can do that, but I offer the rule of formation, which can lead to ordained ministry. I offer this rule for you all as in order to sketch out a vision of what ordained ministry can and perhaps should look like, diaconal, presbyteral, or episcopal. Now, in the first place, seminary formation gives special place to liturgical services. not only as a vocational setting, let's go through what you have to do, what you have to learn, but as the place where faith is received and faith is formed. This is the great vision of liturgical theology put forward by our great dean, Father Alexander Schmemann. From here, everything else that we do finds both its source and its fulfillment in the chapel. And at St. Vladimir's, and I know this to be the way at the other seminaries, and at St. Vladimir's especially, this is our mantra. This is truly what we believe. And we wrestle with the students who are typical students who don't want to go to chapel. We say, oh, yes, you do. Typically at ordination, I say, look, if you want to study religion, if you want to study the church and not go to chapel, there are divinity and religious schools across the United States. Off you go. It saves a lot of time if you don't want to do this. Anyway, as I say, our chapel life, everything we do finds its source and its fulfillment in the seminary chapel. This we proclaim, this we confess, we follow this liturgical theological vision. Concretely, this means that any ordained cleric coming from the seminary should be anchored in the faith of the church as revealed in the vast liturgical vision that the church provides. Our seminaries also place a high price on theological education meaning those things that are similar to any academic program. These classes expose students to the riches of primary text, biblical, patristic, spirituality, liturgical, and challenge them to engage with the complex secondary literature. Assignments are metrics to see whether they are learning and whether we are teaching, for that matter. But here again, another layer of what ordained ministry can or should look like, people anchored in faith, knowledgeable in the tradition, and equipped to communicate, to express, and to explain this faith. Our pastoral classes, our practical classes pass on to the students the necessary training in music, liturgics, and homiletics, as I've said, all of which we know provide the real public faith of ordained ministry in the church. Now, what has emerged in recent years in the seminaries are commitments to rigorous hands-on pastoral formation. I've mentioned working in prison, working in CPE in the hospitals, where students spend hundreds of hours in clinical work and then facing one another in peer review. And again, a further layer emerges of what ordained ministry could and perhaps should look like. Faithful Christians, knowledgeable of the tradition, out in the world, equipped with skills and experience, engaging with those in need, prisoners and the sick. It's almost biblical. All of the seminaries also like to transition seminaries into parochial life and require some exposure, albeit limited, to parochial life through 1 to 3 year parish assignments. Now, I'm not by putting all this forward, I'm not by any means suggesting that everyone who comes to the seminary excels at every one of these things, although it's awesome when they do. Cleo, Richard, Father Nicholas, Father Alessandro, stand up. It's awesome to see. What I am saying is twofold, though. Such programs give a broad sketch to what we can aspire to as church and seminaries. If our deacons, priests, and bishops are not adept at these formation components, this does not negate the importance of theological education, but underscores it, I put forward. What the church needs now more than ever is faithful leaders formed in the faith, given at the liturgy, who can engage with, who are articulate in the modern world in all its complexities, by remaining faithful to the church, but are also trained in exposures to real situations. I note that the seminaries make no difference for formation, at least St. Vladimir's does, for men or women, deacons or priests or bishops. And the order of the deaconesses comes out of its long slumber and were to be revived in the church. The women who have already gone through the Master of Divinity program at the seminary stand as ready testimony to what can be accomplished. Now, within the OCA, we have roughly 690 parishes, 28 monasteries. Serving these communities are 12 diocesan bishops and 1 auxiliary and 8 retired bishops. It's a rather strange number. There are almost 700 priests serving these communities, with another 100 retired priests, my father included, occasionally coming out of retirement. As for deacons, their numbers run upwards of 253. Of these deacons, 70 have received theological education in seminary, 10 from St. Stephen's, which Father Anthony spoke about. The education of 36 is unknown by the Chancellor, the OCA Chancery. There it is. And the rest, roughly half, though, have gone through the Diaconal Vocations Program, the DVP. Deacons scattered throughout the OCA serve cathedrals, parishes, monasteries, and seminaries. Anecdotally, I note that deacons serve as administrators, choir directors, and other roles within the church. Most, I suspect, are liturgical ministers who maintain other careers. Just recently in the OCA, we revised our statute and throughout gave particular standing to deacons to attend All-American Councils and diocesan assemblies, not as laity, which is how they were considered in the previous statute, but in recognition of the growth of the diaconate, they now come within a set category of deacons, statutorily enshrined. I would say finally, with regard to the state of the diaconate in the OCA, this past year we have seen a passing that is not fully perceptible by an analysis of statistics. Not so long ago, the OCA was blessed by a group of deacons who were adept at almost any service, a real SEAL Team 6 of diaconate. 3 of them were ordained to the priesthood, the holy priesthood, have taken parishes and pursued their monastic vocation more fully, and 1 pursued his monastic vocation more fully. And 1, Deacon Gregg Hatrack, who also managed our seminary press, fell asleep in the Lord unexpectedly last summer. His diaconia in the church will be greatly missed. I have tried in this brief presentation to sketch out both the rule and practice, following an ancient canonical principle, to measure both the rule and the practice of the state of the diaconate in the OCA. Admittedly, anecdotes, statistics, and seminary formation only tell part of the story. This is my humor. The church is the household of God. The church here in America is a household of God here in America, has deacons who serve faithfully at the table of the master that he has set in conjunction with the others on staff in his house. The low number of deacons in comparison with the number of parishes suggests that there is more room for diaconal ministry. The number of fine deacons who serve, having come from our well-regarded and well-run DVP program, nevertheless point to me, at least, to a limited function of deacons within the church. In the end, I find myself making the plug that I said I would not make earlier. That is, for a renewal of the diaconia, of the diaconate. I see theological education, seminary formation, as an essential component of this renewal. Thank you.
So we are supposed to have a break now, but we decided we'll go maybe take a couple of questions or